Our story is about a place, a small village hidden in a big city, and the people who lived or once lived in this place. From a distance, it presents itself like so many other places in our city, unimportant, forgotten, neglected. Get closer, though, and you will discover the remnants of a dream long forgotten, being kept alive in the memories of a faithful few. In these memories, you will find the stories of heroism, sacrifice, struggle, triumph, and loss. Our little village has many names: Barton Heights, Battery Park, North Central, Providence Park, Gunner Park Terrace, but we will just call it the historic Brooklyn Park area. Brooklyn Park Boulevard, the street that connects our little village, was once what divided it. Today it holds the promise of becoming a beacon of unity. For the first 42 years of the 20th century, the area was white middle-class community. The racial barrier was broken. However, in 1942, when the first black residents moved into Barton Heights, the southern portion of the community was almost entirely African American by 1950. North of Brooklyn Park Boulevard remained exclusively white until 1962. One resident described Brooklyn Park during that time as the Berlin Wall. Whites on one side, blacks on the other, and no one dared to venture to the other side. Richmond Henrico Turnpike marked the second line, with the community of Highland Park being exclusively white and predominantly working class. African American children growing up in this community described Highland Park as a dangerous place for black youth to venture, with many stating that it was their first encounters with racism occurring in Highland Park. However, those who grew up within these invisible walls described the area as utopian, the perfect place to grow up. Within this African American community, the youth were sheltered from the racism surrounding them, and they were nurtured by the entire village. The largely middle and upper middle class African American families who moved into the areas from 1940s through the 1960s described the community in this way.
And during that time, and the plaza and the terrace was black families. We had a complete village.
My favorite memories when we'd all gather together and had children and all. With them, the people down the street, the people next door, and all the neighborhood.
My best memories of this neighborhood is when I had friends on all the corners. We would get together and sit outside and talk. My next door neighbors, just being able to communicate with my neighbors. We sit out sometimes at night, on a summer night. We may sit on the porch and just talk to each other.
We first organized Neighborhood Watch. The neighbors looked out for each other. You could look out the front or the back, and in that area, we kind of like watched out for everybody. I think if we could get that going again, we might do pretty good.
But there was just a lot of good camaraderie. It just seemed to be a good place to be, and that's why I guess I'm still here.
If we zoom in further, we will discover the unsung heroes of this bygone era. One of the most impactful is Mrs. Ethel T. Overby.
After having been a teacher for more than 20 years, in the fall of 1933, I was named the first female African-American principal in Richmond, serving initially at Elba School. Then in 1950, I became the principal of formerly all-white George Thorpe School the year it was converted into a school for blacks and renamed Albert V. Norrell Elementary. We experienced one of history's most infamous periods of persecution solely because of race. It was brought to the attention of children, parents, and the community at large that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people meant that it was the duty and responsibility of the people to change certain conditions. For 25 years as an elementary school principal, my faculty and I carried on a program of citizenship education. We aimed for 100% registration. Our precinct had more qualified Negro voters who actually voted than any other Negro precinct in our city. In 1954, the year the Supreme Court ruled in the Brown versus Board of Education that separate was inherently unequal, I had my students write essays titled, "Why I'm Against Segregation." These essays appeared in the 1954 Norrell Elementary School newsletter. When school segregation was outlawed, our state counteracted by passing massive resistance laws, hastily drawn up and put into action. In Richmond, Negroes who did not sign pupil placement sheets could not send their children to school. The Pupil Placement Board aimed to use the pupil placement sheets to show that the parents were not concerned about integration. I was given a batch of the pupil placement sheets and did not want my parents to sign them. One of my patrons, the Reverend Irvin Elligan, pastor of All Souls Church, had 2 of his children in my school. I asked him if he was going to sign, and he said no. When he would come to school with his children in the morning, the parents asked me about the pupil placement sheets. I would say, "Go over there and ask Reverend Elligan." And the Reverend Elligan, who brought his children to school every day during this time, would tell them not to sign. The following day, 34 children were brought in by their parents to be registered for the next term in my school. I was supposed to give them the sheets to sign after registering them. I saw a tall man come in with a little 5-year-old child. I showed him the pupil placement sheet and I asked if he planned to sign it. He said no. He was Chester M. Hampton, the editor of the Afro-American newspaper. I said, "Well, if you're not going to sign it, it won't do any good unless you go into that room and tell those parents not to sign it." So he told the parents not to sign anything, but to meet him at a certain church that night and to get all the other parents they could to attend also. In the meantime, he contacted the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They came to the meeting with their lawyers that night. Parents put up enough money to get the case started at once.
By April 1957, the parents, led by Chester Hampton, organized the Richmond Pupil Protection Association to stand against massive white resistance. Hampton orchestrated a public information strategy through his paper, The Afro-American, that increased resistance to signing the forms and galvanized the black community. By June of 1957, over 300 black parents and 6 white parents declined to sign the forms in Richmond. Several principals of black schools ousted or threatened to oust over 100 students whose parents left applications unsigned. 10 out of the 21 black schools turned away students. The parents took up a collection to hire attorney Oliver Hill, who filed suit on behalf of 103 children and their parents, attacking the constitutionality of the Placement Act to deny students admission to schools. On September 17, 1957, Federal Judge Sterling Hutchinson granted a temporary restraining order to hold back enforcement of the Placement Act in Richmond. Richmond's black community, led by Richmond Afro editor Hampton and attorney Hill, both parents of Norrell school children, claimed a small but significant victory against the massive resistance for the 1957-58 school year. As children graduated from Norrell Elementary, they moved on to Graves Junior High School. Overcrowding at Graves Junior High School was intolerable. Students scrambled between 4 buildings to attend classes, crossing major streets in rain, sleet, and snow as teachers worked double shifts. The Graves PTA tendered the school board with 3 proposals: construct new classrooms, reduce pupil enrollment, or restructure school attendance for North Side students to attend schools closer to their neighborhoods, referencing then all-white Chandler Junior High School. On New Year's Day, 1959, over 1,500 blacks marched 2 miles in wintry rain to the state capitol to protest Virginia's massive resistance to school integration, which had resulted in school closures across the state. On January 27, 1959, Hill had penned a letter to the Richmond school superintendent on behalf of 11 children, requesting their transfer from Graves Junior High School to Chandler. 14-year-old ninth grader Paige Lanier was one of those 11 children.
The Pupil Placement Board reviewed the transfer request to Chandler made by Oliver Hill on behalf of my parents and 10 of my peers. They outright denied 9, all 7th and 8th graders. The final judgment on the 2 9th graders, myself and Bernard Gilpin, suggested that we would need to fill out an application to begin the maze of administrative meanderings. By the time we could conceivably overcome these hurdles, we would be 10th graders attending Maggie Walker High, making our entry into Chandler a moot point. The unofficial board notes reveal that every impediment was carefully constructed to thwart us entering Chandler. So nothing happened. The schools were not desegregated before I left Benjamin Graves, and I went on into Maggie Walker High School. And the whole effort to integrate was still going on. There were some African Americans who just couldn't buy into the plan. They saw us as rabble-rousers. They saw us as troublemakers. And why don't you just wait? Just keep quiet. Things are going to change. Sometimes you gotta make things change and not wait for change because other people don't have the same sense of urgency or don't suffer to the same degree. When Richmond schools finally desegregated, it showed the rest of the community that the fight, that the struggle had been worthwhile, and that those who had sat on the sidelines had made the wrong choice. I think it showed how a few folk being determined could change anything.
Threats, dilemmas, and ambivalence now have the burden of integration to a small but influential number of black families living in Northside who are willing to cast their children into the fray of white schools. The Richmond News Leader claimed the voice of the white segregationists. The newspaper stroked the fears of white homeowners north of Brooklyn Park Boulevard and neighborhood businesses in Brooklyn Park Boulevard's commercial district about the conversion of Chandler. They said Negro use of Chandler will hasten the influx of Negroes stretching east and north to expand black migration patterns, ultimately reducing the property values and obliterating white Northside neighborhoods. The fate of Chandler Junior High would emerge as the epicenter of this change. The second annual New Year's Day March in 1960 was led by none other than Dr. Martin Luther King and attended by more than 1,600 who continued to protest against school shutdowns in Prince Edward County. February 9th, 1960. Nearly 1,000 white Northside property owners and residents met at Chandler to strategize a campaign to maintain white control for Chandler and the surrounding neighborhoods. February 20th, 1960. 6 stores in Richmond's downtown area closed their lunch counters when 200 Virginia Union students conducted several sit-in demonstrations and 30 students were arrested. On February 24, 1960, school board held a public hearing on Chandler's fate. 1,600 Northside whites packed the building for a tense and sometimes noisy assembly. Oliver Hill was greeted with boos and name-calling. He had this to say: "As strange as it may seem, we also oppose the conversion of Chandler into a Negro school. The school should not be turned into a Jim Crow school. We don't want white residents to run out. Stay in the homes you have brought and lived in for years, and let Negro students come into the schools as a matter of natural course." This message was not received well. On April 22, 1960, The school board voted that Chandler would continue as a white school for the 1960-61 school year. Despite the efforts of Oliver Hill and other NAACP representatives, only 4 students applied to transfer from Graves to Chandler for the 1960-61 school year. When the Virginia Pupil Placement Board met on August 15th, also of 1960, the board voluntarily assigned Carol Swan and Gloria Meade to Chandler without a court order. 6 years after Brown versus the board decision, Chandler was the first school in Virginia to be integrated voluntarily.
We're 3 blocks from Chandler, and Gloria lived 5 blocks from Chandler, so it was really easy walking distance, although honestly my parents were so afraid we never walked. We got out of the car. It was a block, a kind of dead-end block that ran along the side of Chandler. And we started walking towards the school. And at the other end of the block were lots of reporters. And so they started running at us as we were walking towards them. And that was really, that was very frightening. And in the school there were detectives in suits posted at various points in the school, I guess, to maintain order. And as long as they were there, order was maintained, but they were there for about 2 weeks. And then once they were gone, people felt free to torture us, and they did. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. There was so much hope, certainly in the black community, that this was going to bring a sense of equality, a sense of fairness, that things would be more equal. And that didn't happen. I'm not going to say all of those hopes were not realized, because there are things that, we are able to do now, things that we have access to now that we didn't then. But it wasn't realized in the complete way that we envisioned it, that we hoped for. And I don't know what the answer is.
It has been nearly 60 years since Carol and Gloria climbed those steps at Chandler Junior High. Unfortunately, massive resistance turned into passive resistance as whites fled the city or enrolled their children in private schools. Today, the majority of RPS schools are largely resegregated. Despite Richmond being 40% white, only 9% of RPS students are white.
Is integration a cause worth fighting for? Or is it simply a failed social experiment here in the capital of the Confederacy? If we believe that it is a cause worth fighting for, then we have to have some honest conversations. We have to be willing to look honestly at the past and the present. And we have to talk across these divides that have separated us for far too long.
I'ma preach with no preacher, I'ma teach with no teacher. Staying out the streets and I'm trying to become a leader. Finish the puzzle to the pieces that I can't see though. Police knocking all at my door, I see them through the peephole. People saying that life's a hack, they say we using cheat codes. Babies dying, mama's crying, that's cause they in the street flow. Trying to really get out the hood, education the key though. Get the money, but not by selling weed though. Spitting facts, giving knowledge, now listen real good. Segregation, abomination, my race is real hood. Think they gotta hold the gun so that they can feel good. Whatever, I'm still good.
Whatever, I'm still good. Shout out to the kids who feel better when the weed sparks. Splitting relos down the mid like B Park. Streets all black now, bet they wish they could restart. Fresh start, keep your hands off, it's like wet art. The blacker the bear, the less of humanity. Mom keep losing black sons, they might get to sharing me. Don't want your charity. People compare me, apparently we thugs, not people. We just want parodies. Swear the president is losing his sanity. Gon' turn this to a dictatorship, make America great again. Mistake after mistake, and this excuse for a country. Not angry, I'm just upset.